Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top champions for ranked play in patch 10.20. This list will focus on top performing champions in the current meta across the spectrum of roles including support, carry, and frontline. Keep in mind that there was a balance patch midway through 10.20 that may affect the strength of some champions on the list, but for now we're sticking with their overall viability in 10.20. With all that said, let's get to it. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. To start off our top 10, we have Thresh coming in as the number 10 champion. Before we go into why Thresh is the top 10 champion, we should point out that this list is going to feature quite a few Dusk, Spirit, and Shade champions. Those synergies are just overall consistent in the current meta. And that's where Thresh comes into the picture, as he is silently one of the most played Dusk units in the meta. Practically every game that a player is running Dusk in, you're likely to see Thresh, even if it's only 2 Dusk. Overall, he's a middle-of-the-road kind of champion, as he's an okay frontliner and an okay support. But he serves as the linchpin to so many Dusk-based compositions because he's easy to 2-star and not niche like Vayne. Lilia is often a bit too hard to find consistently, so Thresh ends up being a consistent Dusk champion to play throughout the whole game. On top of that, he always does decently well as a frontliner since he's a Vanguard, which makes him easy to pair with champions like Sejuani or Aatrox. Lastly, the shield his ultimate provides can make or break fights if it comes out in a clutch moment. Basically, Thresh is the foundation for a lot of Dusk compositions and a champion you're going to see played a lot even if it doesn't seem like he's doing much. Let's move on to the number 9 champion on today's list, Zed. Normally a champion like Zed would not make it into our top 10. It takes quite a few things to make him viable, but the fact of the matter is that when you get Zed going, he will dominate the game. Zed 3 with Rageblade, Rapid Fire Cannon, and Quicksilver is easily one of the scariest mid to late game champions in the current meta. Mix in 2 or 4 Spirit and make him a chosen Shade, and you're almost guaranteeing yourself a top 2 finish. Essentially what it comes down to is that, yes, getting the perfect conditions for Zed isn't easy, but when you can, or at least near perfect, he's easily one of the best champions. Between his damage with Shade and his passive and the attack speed buff he gets from Spirit and Rageblade, he's immensely difficult to deal with for a lot of compositions. Shade especially makes him a threat as he causes champions to stop focusing on him when he goes invisible, allowing him to survive much longer in fights than he actually should. All in all, Zed is the top champion in the right conditions, but those conditions are why he's only number 9 on the list. Next up, we have Ashe coming in at number 8. Ashe is still doing well as a main carry for brawler-focused compositions. She can do quite well with 6 or more Elderwoods, but primarily she's still played in 6 or 8 brawlers. Unfortunately for her, she's definitely fallen down in priority and strength, as a lot of builds tend to do well into her. Plus, she's one of the champions nerfed in the B patch. That said, if you can get an Ashe 2 with items like Giant Slayer, Quicksilver, and Hand of Justice, she is going to carry you to a top 4 consistently. The main issue is securing Sett to help ease the brawler composition into the late game. But be sure to scout what other players are playing in your lobby, as clumping up against Ahri builds can be just as devastating as not protecting your Ashe against Shade builds. Sejuani is next on the list as the number 7 champion for today. Good old reliable Sejuani is still doing amazing in the meta as an all-around solid frontliner. Honestly, you can completely ignore her traits and she'll still be useful, as her crowd control is close to the best, if not the best, in the game. The main downside to Sejuani is that it can be difficult to slot her into your build, and a lot of the time her ultimate won't be able to affect the enemy carry. As an aside, it's worth pointing out that Fortune has been having success in 10.20. With the average value of Fortune being increased, it's possible to run the trait in the early game or mid game to get a decent amount of value. That said, it can be difficult to find Sejuani early enough to make use of Fortune. For the most part, you're only going to use her as a solo champion or with a second Vanguard like Thresh or Aatrox. As we said before, this list has quite a few Dusk champions, so let's talk about another one with Cassiopeia as our number 6 champion. Cassiopeia is somewhat similar to Thresh, as she's an overall staple champion for any Dusk composition. But more so than that, she has an incredibly useful secondary synergy with Mystic, making her appealing to play in a majority of compositions, as splashing into Mystic is just very solid to have in every build. So if you're already putting her in to get the 2 Mystic buff, it makes a lot of sense to slot in a second Dusk for another team-wide buff. And that's how Cassiopeia, like Thresh, ends up being one of the most played champions for a lot of players. Of course, she does provide more than just her synergy, as her ability provides a good amount of AoE damage and crowd control. This means the amount of value she has is insanely high, given you can splash her in for potentially 2 synergies while also adding in crowd control to your composition. On top of that, she's a 4 cost, meaning you can consistently find her, so she's more reliable than, say, Zilean, even if Zilean is technically a better Mystic. Let's move on and talk about the number 5 champion for today, Sett. Sett definitely fell off a bit in terms of priority and value from 1019 to 1020, but overall he's still one of the best late game champions in the game. The main issue is that he can lack a bit of consistency, especially at level 1. But if you manage to 2-star him, his value goes way up and he'll be dunking on the enemy team without any issue. The other downside to Sett in the current meta is that the build that you would want to play him in most, brawlers with Ashe carry, is no longer the dominant force in the meta. This means that he gets less value as he was amazing against the brawler build, and less value as you're likely just running him as a solo champion, meaning that he doesn't actually get added brawler health. But again, even with the potential downsides to running Sett, he still does a ton of damage late game and is the second best legendary to play regardless of your comp. It's time again for another Dust champion, as next up we have Riven coming in at number 4. Riven is still carrying the Dust torch in the current meta, as she's just an overall great champion. The main downside to Riven is that you want to fully itemize her and generally need 4 or 6 Dust for her to truly shine. But those aren't really huge issues to overcome, and with the amount of other compositions being played, it's actually pretty easy to 2-star her right now. Overall, if you're wanting to lean on a simple to run carry, you can always turn to Riven. As long as you toss in a few extra Dust champions, you can basically tailor the rest of your comp to whatever you need for the current lobby. The flexibility of Riven in terms of composition and items is really where you find value when playing her. Ahri is up next as the number 3 champion for today's list. Spirit was nerfed in both the original 1020 patch and once again in the B patch a few days ago. Those nerfs are still being figured out, so the value of Ahri may go down depending on how the meta shifts. But for now, she's still doing well as both a damage dealer and as the best Spirit champion to proc the attack speed buff. Let's set aside the Spirit trait to focus on Ahri as a champion specifically. Basically, she does a lot of damage. Like, a lot of damage. Especially if you can get her items like Jeweled Gauntlet or Death Cap. The major downside to Ahri as a damage dealer is that she's rather squishy, but Guardian Angel solves this, as she can still get a cast off even while the resurrection effect is going on. The bottom line is that Ahri is a staple champion in the current meta, whether it is as a bit of extra damage for mage builds, a frontliner for Spirit, or as the main carry in Vanguard Mystic. Alright, let's move on to our last 2 champions. The champion coming in at number 2 on today's list is Aphelios. This is likely the most up in the air placement on today's list. The reason is that Aphelios received a nerf in the B patch as well as Spirit, meaning that he got hit twice by the nerfs. What this means for Aphelios is that his place in the meta is actually uncertain. He may remain one of the strongest champions, or he may fall off to be a bit more of a niche pick, but for now let's focus on how dominant he's been in 1020. Basically, Moonlight and Guardian Angel make Aphelios a ridiculously good champion. On top of that, you get the attack speed scaling from Rageblade and Spirit, and you have yourself an amazing carry for the current meta. Hard to kill while doing a ton of damage? Yes please, that'd be great to have. And Aphelios has that as long as you meet the right conditions. Those conditions are what are holding back Aphelios from being the best champion in 1020, as you do need to be able to 4-star him, meaning you need to have a 3-star not only Aphelios, but also 1 or 2 of the other Moonlight champions. On top of that, you absolutely need Guardian Angel and Rageblade, and preferably a Quicksilver. In a lot of ways, he's like Zed in that you need to meet specific conditions for him to be a carry. But it's easier to meet those conditions, and he's a counter to Zed, making him a top range carry in 1020. Okay, now we can move on to the number 1 champion for today, Kane. Kane slides into the number 1 spot this week for a few reasons. One is that players have realized just how good he is, and now he gets played as a solo champion consistently. 2 is that he makes for an easy late game transition for a lot of builds, especially Shade. The third reason is that Sett fell off a bit in priority, meaning you're more likely to see players prioritize Kane in the late game. So why is Kane good? It comes down to the fact that his ability does a lot of damage, is amazing against isolated targets, can heal him if you go for red gain, and increases the mana cost of enemy champions that his spell hits. Essentially, his kit is just way overloaded at the moment, on top of being a shade, so he gets direct access to the enemy backline. If you're looking for a strong late game transition, try adding Kane into your composition, either with shade or just on his own. That is going to be it for our top 10 champions for 1020. But we're not done just yet, as we have a few honorable mentions to talk about. First up is Yuumi. Yuumi is the spirit version of Cassiopeia, except she doesn't have crowd control and instead provides healing to the champion she jumps to. But she is a core unit for any composition running spirit, which means you're going to see her played a lot. She's an all-around solid champion in the current meta, but is outshined by other mystics like Zilean and Cassiopeia. Next, we have Yasuo. Yasuo doesn't provide much unless you're 3-starring him and running duelists. Besides that, if you find an early chosen Yasuo, he's quite good and can often result in a win streak. Those two reasons are why we're highlighting him this week as an honorable mention. And our last honorable mention is Veigar. Veigar is another champion that got smacked by the nerf bat in the B patch, so his place in the meta is up in the air at the moment. That said, he's been doing well as a main carry if you can begin stacking him early on in the game. And if you give him blue buff with a gunblade, he is surprisingly hard to kill, making him a relatively reliable carry. Alright folks, that's all we have for you for today. Overall, the meta hasn't shifted too much from 1019 to 1020. That said, we'll have to see how the B patch affects the placement of a few champions we talked about and whether it shakes up the meta or not. Let us know in the comments section below what champions you think deserve to be on the list that we may have overlooked. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.